Okay, well, I guess if you're here, you're interested in how I founded with my team a $10 million valued co-working business, which we built over 6 years, and how I guess we messed it up, or why it's not still here today, which I think is really interesting and relevant in today's market, because with the future of work, you're seeing a lot of flexibility being integrated in offices and how people want to work from home, and the term hybrid work you may be hearing a lot. So there's a lot of learnings that we had through that business, which we did for about 6-7 years. And I'd love to share with you the lessons I've learned, some personal reflections of being a co-founder, and what might be insightful if you're out there starting a business yourself or founding a company yourself. And it doesn't have to be in co-working, it could be anything. Because technically, even though our business was in co-working, it turned into more of a tech company towards the end, which I'll explain. And I'll timestamp everything that I talk about, so you can skip to the things that you'll be interested in, because I'm just gonna rant, I guess, to a degree to the camera, and I don't know how long this is gonna go for, and I'm probably gonna miss a bunch of things, but hopefully it's of value to you, So maybe I'll start with who I am. My name's Tashi Dorji. Currently I work at a very large global property and tech company, a Fortune 500 company, and I took a lot of my learnings from this startup that I did and brought it there, and I guess I can talk about that a bit later. But the topic of today is the startup that I co-founded with my business partner at the time, and it was called TwoSpace. And what we did is we turned restaurants that were closed during the day into a network of co-working spaces that were scattered across Australia and also Asia. And the whole point of it was to embrace the sharing economy. So rather than lease and re-rent space, we'd find partners that, like restaurants, that had beautiful fit outs that would only open, say, 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the evening, but they're paying rent the whole time, right? So it's just sitting there. And we offered them a model where, hey, we'll come in and we'll take the space from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We'll fill it with freelancers and people who want to not work from home or don't have an office. And we'll give you a share in the revenue of the membership revenue that we generate, which was very affordable for those members because we weren't paying rent. So our operating costs were very light. And also, when you open for trade and we'd have to figure out the operations of that, you'd theoretically have a bunch of people in your restaurant that you could order food, and generate food and beverage revenue for your restaurant. And that first hour of opening is always iffy for those businesses, so they quite enjoyed it. So that was the concept. And this was about 8 years ago now, 9 years ago now. And the funny thing is I think it would do quite well in this market today. So I would not be surprised if you're watching this and you're attempting a similar model. And if you are, then this should be helpful, because I'll tell you what worked and what didn't, and how we pivoted over a 6-year, I guess, stint and runway. And you can take those learnings away for yourself. I guess, it'd be interesting for you to first off start with how we came up with the idea and how we got started. And a bit of it comes down to, I guess, my backstory in sustainability. So before that, I was part of an environmental startup where we protected rainforests through carbon financing and carbon trading. And it's because I had a love for rainforests and orangutans and everything like that. And that business thrived and did really well. And I guess the pivot into office space and co-working happened because I felt like, with the dwindling amount of space and land that we have, an angle for sustainability is the sharing economy. If there's a bunch of space and a bunch of, I guess, restaurant owners and soon hotels that we partner with later down the track that had this space but weren't utilizing it 100% of the time, why don't we help them with that? And why don't we pay them for that? And then why don't we find people who needed space that couldn't have space because they couldn't afford the traditional office space, but this was an extremely affordable option for them. So my business partner at the time, we were just catching up actually as friends in a restaurant, funnily enough, during the day that normally was closed. And we were just talking about, because we worked together in the past at that rainforest startup. What are you doing? What are you up to these days? And we were just brainstorming, how cool would it be if we did this and that? And we actually just had a lightning bolt moment where we're like, hey, we're having a business meeting right here in this restaurant that should be closed. It's beautiful. This fit out is great because they spent a lot of money to generate a feeling and experience in that location. Way better than some of the offices out there at the time. There's something here. So long story short, it stuck with us and we launched TwoSpace, right? And the name, funnily enough, came from when we both lived in Singapore at the time. There was one of our favorite pizzerias. It was like by day, it was a cafe for all the aunties and uncles and the grandmas and grandpas. But in the evening, it flipped into a pizzeria and a beer place. So all the young folk would come and it was called Two-Face, like the Batman villain. And we always thought that was fascinating back then. It's like, oh, how cool is that, right? They were way ahead of their time because if you look at a lot of places now like ghost kitchens and restaurants that share space, or even this concept, this co-working restaurant thing, it's all happening now because we're all trying to figure out affordable solutions, but also how to monetize the space we have. But back then, credit to them, they had it figured out. So that really inspired us with this. And when we first got started, I guess to anyone out there who's a founder or thinking of being a founder, my first piece of advice to you is don't do it. Don't do it. You got to be kind of crazy to do this stuff. And people think I'm joking when I say that, but it's honest advice, And here's the kicker. For those who don't listen to me and do it anyway, you're the right person for the job, all right? If you don't listen to me, you're like, I'm going to do it anyway, then that's the kind of, I guess, grit and emotion and feeling that you need to even embark on this marathon of a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And when you start a business, I think resourcefulness is the best resource that you can have, not money or funding or anything like that. And I'll give you an example. So when we came up with this idea, we were like, okay, cool. The first thing we need to do is we need to find a venue that is willing to take a punt with us. And who the hell are we, right? We've never done this before. We don't have experience in co-working or anything. And then we also needed to find an internet provider, someone big that would help us out with providing Wi-Fi and an internet connection within the space. So we're in a bit of a pickle, right? And we also wanted awareness. We're like, oh, we'll find some press. We'll find a newsroom or an entity that's willing to report on it. So we had these three moving parts at the front, right? News for the hype and the branding, venue for our first launch location, an internet provider to provide, fast Wi-Fi and internet within the restaurant space. And the funny thing is that we got interest for all three, right? At the time we had the Sydney Morning Herald, which is a big publication in Australia, Sydney. We had Optus, right? Because they had an innovation lab that was very interested in the idea. And we had, after door-to-door knocking on 600 restaurants, and I thought, oh, this would be a breeze. At the start, I was like, who wouldn't want free money if we can figure this out? But they're all like, oh, no, we don't want to do it with you. Who are you? Have you done this before? We don't want to be the first. What about insurance? What if someone breaks their leg or burns down my place? Literally, and when I say 600, that number is burned into the back of my head because we didn't just cold call and call everyone because no one would pick up, right? Because if you're trying to call a restaurant, when you think about it, the people, when they're picking up, they're busy with trade. They're hustling, they're working, they're in the kitchens, they're serving. They don't want to deal with some random person that's calling up saying, hey, let me pitch you this ridiculous idea that's never been done before. So I would literally go on Google Maps and go to suburbs and locations and pick 50 locations at the time with my business partner. And funnily enough, and I'll get to this point straight after, he was a developer. So great combination of skill set because I would have been the noisy mouthpiece and he was the dev and also the straight shooter. So we were a great combination, yin and yang in that regard. And he would generate this list of, here are 50 restaurants, Tash, where they're all within the area. So if you hustle, you could door-to-door knock on all 50 before they open for trade. Because we found that getting their attention at 4 p.m., right before 5 p.m. was the best shot because the owner was there as well, right? And I distinctly remember it because I would do that even when it was pissing down rain because we set a timeline for us to get our first location, which we wanted to stick to, right? Both him and I were very big on setting targets and meeting them, especially very early on when it was just an idea. Because if you don't hold yourself accountable, then you got nothing, right, before you even launch. So long story short, went through all of those venues, found one, and we're still friends with them today because in the end they kind of believed in us as people. They're like, you know what, kiddo, we'll let you take a punt, right, with our space. And they were enticed about, oh, okay, this is a cool idea, we're willing to do it. But their condition was, we want you to get the Wi-Fi sorted first, so get that deal done first, because we're not going to launch with you without the Wi-Fi. Funnily enough, with Optus, after many, many meetings on their campus and everything, they're like, we'll do it, but we need you to get a venue first, right? And then the Sydney Morning Herald, the news article, like, we'll write the article, but we need the venue and Optus as a partner and all that kind of stuff first. So it was all, we had all the three moving parts, and we were like, okay, so I'm not endorsing and say run around and lie, but it was one of those moments where it was like, hey, Optus, yeah, we got the venue and we got Sydney Morning Herald. Hey, restaurant, yeah, we got Optus and we've got, venue, we've got Optus and Sydney Morning Herald. Hey, Optus, yes, we've got the venue and Sydney Morning Herald. Hey, Sydney Morning Herald, yes, we've got the venue and Optus. So it was kind of like a bit of a gray area of kind of connecting all of those dots, but it worked out in the end because we got the venue, we got Optus, and we got the newspaper article to publish it. So that was, I guess, our first big break and first step to building a brand and leveraging it to sign on more venues and build a community. So that's kind of the point I was making about resourcefulness, because we had nothing. All we had was an idea. And to many founders out there, as we all know, an idea doesn't mean anything without execution and consistency. I genuinely think operations and people in operations make the world go round, not necessarily mouthpieces like me. To the co-founder point, this is a really important one, because I see a lot of founders just rushing into finding anyone who's willing to give them time and partnering and giving them half their company or sweat equity or whatever, and let's do this together. I always look at that, or used to look at that back then as, oh, this is important as getting hitched, as getting married, right? Go on a few dates, well, not a few, be together for a while before you really commit, because starting a business together is no simple feat. It's going to be up and down like a roller coaster, right? And also find someone not only that you get along well with, but complements your skill set. And before I go into skill set for our example, a good reference to get along well, and I even use this principle today when I'm hiring people for my team at my current company, is I call it the airport test, right? Which is, even if you've got two people and they're both equally skilled, or one might be more skilled than the other, if you're about to create a team with them or have them join your team or start a business together, you got to ask yourself, okay, out of these two individuals, who would I rather get stuck in an airport with, right? If for some reason we were traveling somewhere and we got stranded in an airport for like 48 hours, which of the two could I get along with, conjure up a conversation and feel good about? And that's generally how I went, because at the end of the day, whether you're in a B2B business or a B2C, or even with your team, we're all people, we're all humans. So I think H to H is this new thing that's probably going to emerge, called human to human, whatever. And so I always went by that. Now, in terms of the complementary skill set as a co-founder, he was a coder and a developer. So an extremely rare breed back then. So I was very, very lucky, because I think if I did it back then with another me, it would have failed completely, wouldn't even have gotten off the ground. Because I would literally be running around conjuring interest, finding leads and coming up with maybe 100 ideas. And he would be like, 99 of those suck, but that's the good idea, right? And then we'd go all in on that. So I think we worked together really well. And being a developer, especially when we started pivoting less from just co-working and restaurants, more to technology, he was a big player in that. And the reason why technology became really important for us, so especially if you're trying to do a similar business where you're trying to flip restaurant space or bars or hotels into co-working spaces, when you think about the value proposition beyond just the space that you're offering, you got to think, what do we give, even if it's affordable, that's more valuable than a slightly better office space. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have printers, you're not going to have all of these things a traditional office might provide that someone might need to get their work done, like extra monitors and all that kind of stuff. A sense of security. You don't get that with this model. But what you do get is not only do you get a beautiful environment, but you also get access to a very diverse and connected community. And in order to create that community, we didn't want to just rely on people using the space and bumping into each other. We created a platform that connected all the different individuals from all the different locations via the platform. And we did that through Wi-Fi check-in technology back then. So if you checked into a space and if you opted to be shown, your TwoSpace profile would pop up with your name, who you are, and you could fill out a bio and also your skill set. Because what we found is, if similar to how my partner and I met and started TwoSpace, if I was a salesperson working from a space and I wanted to start something and a bunch of developers would pop up working from a restaurant, not the one I was working in, but nearby or even in another city, I would ping them or even go and make a point to work from there to kind of meet up with them, right? So it's almost like, how do you use technology to take connecting like-minded individuals, not just within the restaurant space itself, but amongst them all. So you create this connected community. And that's kind of why I think it would do great today, even in a post-COVID world. So the tech piece was really important, especially on the point of when you think about, even though you've got a really beautiful space, you don't have a lot of things that you can offer for a traditional co-working space or office space. So what do? You always got to think about that as a business owner or a product creator or a founder. What can you offer that's valuable against competitors in the market? What don't you offer? And how do you fill that gap, right? Or how do you make them ignore the stuff that they don't get and value the stuff that you do give them? Because what was really interesting is we eventually got to 10,000 users, and I would say 80% of them had an office, right, already. Or they had a home office. It's not like they didn't have anywhere to work. So they ended up signing up to access the community, because we had newsletters and everything, and they were meeting people, and we hosted events in all the different restaurants, and they were beautiful locations. So that was an incredible learning for us to be like, when we first started, we were like, oh, this is for everyone who can't afford space, which was true to a demographic of our clientele, but it evolved into people just wanted variety in places where they worked. Maybe they had an office or somewhere that they work Monday to Friday, but by becoming a member, because it was affordable, they would come and work from this space, 1 or 2 days a week. And I think that was a fascinating learning, which actually made us pivot a little, in the third year of running this business, in a very interesting way. Because, and I guess the lesson here is, how do you keep evolving and developing? How do you keep learning? And how do you evolve it, especially if you are very customer focused and you reverse engineer the value to your customer rather than build it and they will come, right? And the learning that we found, which allowed us to, I guess, infiltrate corporate customers, was people just want different places to work, right? So when we conducted surveys and interviewed all of our customers, they were like, the thing that came across the most, there were 3 things. There was access to a community. So they love the activation and engagement, which is a big thing in office markets today, because we're all trying to get people back into the office anyway. So that still holds true. There was access to a community of like-minded people. People just like being around people. It's in our DNA. When you think about it, like, technically you could have your beers, you could have your food at home, you could do everything at home, not just work from home. But why do you go out to a party? Why do you go out to a restaurant or a pub? Why do you go out to a park? Why do you do any of that stuff? You don't necessarily run around and talk to everyone. You just like being around, I guess, the ambiance and people, right? So access to that. And then the third one was they think different in different environments, which I found incredibly interesting back then. Because I'm like, wait, you're telling me that you're going to pay us when you've already got technically the product that we're offering you, from a physical sense, to come and use our offering because you think different in this environment? And they were like, yeah. Because since we had the restaurant model, we had restaurants that were closed during the day that we activated as co-working on beaches, on rooftop bars, you know, in really cool neighborhoods that had like an artistic demographic in the area. So lots of creatives went to work there, in office lobbies, into hotel lobbies. And hotels are interesting. I'll get into that because it raises a really important point about operational costs and how you run a business and things that you should think about for that, whether you're on co-working or whatever. So that nugget was huge for us because we took that and I was like, okay, if we have this large of a market of people that think different here, companies would love it if they could almost have a corporate package to send their employees there. And one of our largest clients back then was Atlassian, you know, an Australian tech company, you know, and a unicorn and a huge, I guess, hero to the Australian market in terms of tech companies and what they've done as founders. Because they would fly all of their leadership team every quarter together within Sydney, and they would do meetings everywhere. And I learned from there because they were actually one of our first corporate clients, and I tip my hat to them because they also did it to support an Australian startup, an Australian business as ours. They were like, we'll give you a shot, but they turned out to be a great client and we retained them. Because their ethos was, and I'll never forget this, and I live to this like ethos to this day, and I hope you take it away with you as well. If you've got 10 people and you send them into a room to solve a problem, they'll come out with one solution 99% of the time, right? If you split those 10 people up into 3 groups of 3, you know, 1 group of 4 to round it up, and you send them to different locations for inspiration, like a beach, a rooftop, and a traditional office space, maybe a library or whatever, and you ask them to solve that same problem, they'll come back with, you know, 3 or 4 solutions, which is incredible, right? And that was almost a case study / testimonial to take to all these different companies and be like, hey, the next time you've got a problem-solving session or a workshop, don't do it in your boardroom, no matter how beautiful it is. Why don't you come and work from some of our spaces? Because we've got incredible restaurants and fit-outs and all that kind of stuff. So that was a really good example that helped us tap into not just the individual market where we were leveraging digital marketing and branding and everything to get all of these individual users to buy memberships, almost like a gym membership. We started targeting corporates. And that was huge for us, yeah. So the hotel angle that I just touched on, which I'll go on more, was another evolution that we did within the business. Because the restaurant angle is cool and frankly fits into an elevator pitch a lot better, like a 30-second pitch or whatnot. Because you're like, oh, close during the day and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But hotels is where we very organically evolved into from a how do we survive mode mentality. And actually, before I even get into the hotels, that point is really important. Like, I feel like a lot of startups and companies glorify raising funding. Like, oh, we got a Series A, oh, we got seed funding, oh, we raised $1 million and all that kind of stuff. And they publish it and everyone's like, good job. But that's just the beginning. I don't see necessarily that as a huge success. It's a great effort that you raise the funding. It shows that you've demonstrated diligence and you've got a plan and this is how you aim to do it. But I see funding as an obligation, not necessarily as a success. Because now you got someone breathing down your shoulder going, have you hit your target? What are you spending my money on? What are you doing? What's your plan? You can't do that. That's my money. No, I don't agree with that. I need you to do it this way. We technically own half of you now, or whatever percentage it is, right? So we actually tried to avoid funding for the longest time possible, and we never actually ended up taking funding because we wanted control, whether that was the right or wrong thing to do. And so I think if you don't go to funding, what you'll realize is when you're building a business, revenue is not king, profit's king, right? Number of users is not king, cash flow is king, right? Because if you're not relying on someone to bankroll you, you have to very quickly innovate and build product offerings that have margin, which are scalable, right? You're not in a situation where like we've got $1 million or even if it's 100K or whatever it is that you take very early on and you're like, all right, let's see how we can spend this money to get to 100,000 users or 1 million users that don't make us any money, but it's totally fine because we'll figure out once we've got their attention how to monetize it further down the track. I've never really believed in that model. whether I'm right or wrong, and I'm not the authority on that. But that's why we didn't raise funding. We were like, how do we get members? How do we do a OPEX light model? How do we generate margin almost day one? And how do we scale that? Which is really funny because I still remember the first $100 that we made. My business partner and I spent it on swag. We bought hoodies. We did all of that stuff, really cheap hoodies, but branded. I've still got it somewhere and I use it as pajamas when it's really cold. But again, that comes to just feeling good about, your first step and your first dollar coming in. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily chase the funding so much. And I think it forces a company and a startup to figure out how to grow as a business in a scalable way. And on the point of scalable, last point before I go into the hotels, you got to do things, actually, it's kind of contradictory to what I just said now in terms of scalability, but at the start, you got to do things that also don't scale, which we were a big fan of. So we were like, okay, we can do a lot of these things with our first 10 locations, but once we get to 100 or 200 or whatever, it's not going to work, right? But that's totally okay, because if you can engage your community, engage your customer base early on by doing things that you may not be able to do longer term, and by that I could mean as an individual, as a founder, you're the one doing stuff which is not scalable because you're only one person. You'll need eventually to hire a team to do it. And in order to hire a team, you need to be generating enough income to cover that team, cover that operating costs. Or, even the way that you potentially position the product to a market, right? You may be doing it in a very unscalable manner because it may be an individual, it may be yourself going to panel chats or doing interviews or personally going to network events to get your first few customers or hosting them or all that kind of stuff. Not super scalable, right? That's more of a personal branding piece, which I get a lot of people find important when they start a company, whether it's ego, which I had a lot of back then, or whether they think it's to do with building that brand. Doesn't work long term, right? And you'll burn yourself out, guaranteed. There's things that I did back then that I think about now that I just fall asleep thinking about it. I don't have the energy for that anymore. So hotels, all right? We pivoted to hotels, and again, even though this is specific to our company, there's a learning in this because it was a cost decision. It was how do we reduce our costs as a business so that we increase our profits, so that we can hire more people, which I know is increasing costs, but that was the hurdle that we needed to overcome in order to grow, right? Because we wanted to control the experience a bit better, right? Because we had certain scenarios because we were so asset light and we grew very quickly that we had an extremely great brand and great experiences, but we couldn't control a lot of the stuff, which you don't necessarily have to, but that led to a lot of poor experiences too. So the hotel model made sense because when you take over a restaurant that's closed during the day, there is no staff there. You might have a chef out back prepping for the evening or whatever, but there's no one there. So you technically have to staff that location. And staffing that space is not feasible, right? It's too expensive. So we actually used an ambassador model, kind of like the Nike ambassadors and stuff like that back then. We gave someone a revenue share of that venue, but they also had a free membership and free perks and all that kind of stuff. So they were almost like, part of the TwoSpace. I'm not going to say cult because we didn't go down that WeWork route, but, and not to say that WeWork's a cult or anything. I rescind that statement. But it was more about, okay, well, let's find some ambassadors for each location, like 2 or 3, so they can cover one another and they'll be responsible for their community, right? Which also had its own problems as you scale. Because, more people, more problems, as they say. But hotels, if you find hotels, they already have a staff on there 24/7, whether it's at the bar, the hotel concierge, or floating around taking care of the venue. And hotels were an amazing market for us because a lot of hotels were trying to figure out the problem. Oh, even if we're 100% occupied, our restaurants and lobby spaces, even though they're gorgeous, is dead empty all the time. It may as well be empty to the open eye. Plus, if they had a restaurant or a bar in there, they would find problems where across the road, especially in Australia, there would be bars packed, right, every evening and especially in weekends. But the hotel bar would be empty because there was this stigma that, only guests could go in there. We're not allowed to go in there, nor do we want to. We will go to the pubs. So there was a need for hotels for this kind of model. If we could bring people in there to work, to order food, order drinks, tell people about it, it was almost free marketing to a degree, which was another learning that I'll get to. So if rather than necessarily worrying about staffing costs for each location, I was able to partner with hotels and groups and train their staff on TwoSpace and co-working and how to ask questions. And we printed all these cards that they kept behind concierges like, oh, these are the 3 things that you say to someone if someone comes up asking for it. And we used our Wi-Fi check-in technology to create Wi-Fi within each of their venues. So they'd be almost like when you click on the Wi-Fi, there'd be TwoSpace members. And when you click on that and you opened it up, you'd sign into the community portal. And as soon as you're in, you had kind of like a virtual concierge, which would be powered by AI today, which would have been amazing back then with all the chatbots and stuff like that we didn't necessarily have back then. Funnily enough, again, something not scalable, but for the illusion of a big team back then, we created like 2 or 3 fake emails, like guys and girls or something, so that it didn't seem like it was just 3 people running the business and we were behind there responding, I guess, to customer inquiries and stuff like that. Again, the illusion, the fake it till you make it, I guess. Not endorsing it today. Do what you got to do sometimes, right? As long as you're providing a good product and no one's getting hurt. Yeah, we didn't have to worry about the staffing costs or anything within the hotel. It would almost be like, okay, if we can push that onto the hotel staff who are already being paid, and we leverage our technology so that they can check into the platform and see who else is working, and the virtual concierge tells them how to behave and the etiquette rules, and the staff is there to look over them and look after them, and then the hotel and the chefs provide a member-friendly menu that's way affordable, because also back then we were like, oh, if they're using our platform and our product, they can't afford $40 lunches or in some of these hotels and restaurants. Can you do like almost like a $10 version? It's still good for you because you'll generate food and beverage revenue, and we can do it in a food cost light way. And we could also advertise food, not Monday to Friday, because when you think about it from a restaurant owner perspective as well, that means they would have to staff it every day, and you may not get the traffic you want every day. So we'd host it like every other day or like 2 days a week. We'd be like food at this venue, and then we'd have people come because it'd be a good deal too, right? Funnily enough, back then, we didn't know it was really AI we were talking about. It was more machine learning and data analytics, but we were like, how cool would it be if we could track all of the data of all our venues to predict foot traffic on days, weeks ahead of time, or every week. And then we would empower the restaurants and the hotels with that information so they can put food or events on those days to capitalize on that, to help provide experiences, but also generate revenue, right? So the hotel model made sense, and for us, it was how do we reduce our costs? This is a new way to do it, which leads to one of the last pivots we made, which was really important and important for anyone thinking about doing a similar model today, which I think would work. We actually stopped charging the members. And I know that sounds crazy because that's how we were making money, right? We stopped charging the members entirely. We and that's how we hit like 10,000 members plus, right? Because we kind of we took a moment and we were like, who's getting the most value out of this? Sure, the members, they're getting a lot of stuff out of it, but who else? Well, the venues are getting a lot out of it, right? Because they're getting revenue share, they're getting activation, they're getting free marketing, which as a mistake, we didn't really measure that value back then because we weren't numerically equipped. We weren't savvy with marketing. Whereas if we had a marketing person, a proper one, or a marketing co-founder, they'd be like, oh, hey, this many eyeballs, blah, this much value. You would normally spend 20K a year on marketing, spend it on us, and because we're getting way more reach and way more authentic engagement because we're speaking to this community every day, blah, blah, blah. We found that the venues were getting the most value because they were getting foot traffic in, they were getting the eyeballs, they were getting food and beverage revenue. We were doing newsletters to our entire community, which kept growing on even hotel offers or restaurant offers. So they'd be like, even if you don't work from the space, come in and have dinner there. So there was an immense amount of value there. So the pivot was we stopped charging members and we started charging venues, right? And the way that we priced, well, how much do you charge a venue, right? Is, well, how many members do we think would normally use that venue? What kind of income do we think we would project based on the head count that you could fit within that venue? Does that seem about right to charge a venue based off what they're getting? Sure. So it's almost like if we were going to flip it, we didn't want to do it in a way where we take a cash flow dip. We did it in a way where, okay, that makes sense. It's kind of equal. Maybe we'll charge a bit more to the venues because they get more value in theory, so we should. But we just didn't want to go to all of our partners at the time, our venue partners and our very valuable clients, and be like, we're charging you now. So we kind of phased into it in a sense that we're like, hey, if you'd like to be a venue partner 1.0, here are the 3 tiers of partnership that you can get where you unlock certain extra benefits, or you unlock the data analytics. We'll do extra events at your space. We'll bring in sponsors to activate it, whether it's a TED talk because we had a partnership with them back then, or we'll get some of these beer and wines and drinks or coffees and tea sponsors to come in and host these really cool experiences on, how do you do this and that, and let me teach you how to make a cocktail, which is all the rave right now. And funnily enough, back then we didn't just want to go, oh, this is light, medium, high. So, on brand for us, and brand's really important, we kind of did it as pizza toppings. I think we did like cheese supreme or something like that. And they loved it. And we got our first few, right? And this is almost like, this was like 4 or 5 years deep in. It felt very much like when we first started, when we got our first venue with the Optus Sydney Morning Herald venue thing. We got our first venue. They was like, we'll pay that. And that was amazing because, the members within that cohort were able to, weed them off memberships. We had to do that in a very careful way because, we couldn't get everyone off memberships till we got enough venues to get that critical mass, right? But that first venue was amazing because then we got a case study. We got a runway of like 4 or 5 months worth of data, had a great case study, took it to other venues and said, look at all of the incredible value they're getting. And the hotels were the first to jump on that, right? Because they've got budgets for those kind of things. So we switched it from members to charging venues. And that's actually what allowed us to scale very quickly towards the end to a huge membership base, which generated even more value because now we were almost like, you can use this space for free if you sign up to be a TwoSpace member. We just need a bit of data from you, and not in a big brothery, creepy kind of way, but enough to understand what our demographic was, what kind of interests do you have so we could host the right events, all of that kind of stuff, not where you live necessarily or anything like that. And that was of value as well, to the point where we started getting partners and sponsors going, hey, we'd love your data. And we were like, no, that's against our promise and our commitment to our customers and our policies. But this was kind of around the age where data started to become this really big thing, right? And our data told us, again, which I mentioned earlier, our biggest customer were people who wanted to work somewhere different so they could have different experiences and be a part of a community and think different, right? And a big part of our brand was experiences back then, which kind of translates still to what co-working should be today. What's floating around is not only is commercial office being hotelified, becoming like hotels, but we are living in an experience and a quality-driven market. And for those not really in commercial real estate, in short, like tenants and companies are going to offices that aren't just offices anymore. Those buildings and owners are making an effort to almost turn it into a bit of a hotel and to have different tiers of amenity and experiences in it so that you don't feel like going to the office like you're going into the office. You're going somewhere that has, events on every week, every month, every quarter, that's seasonal or really engaging, that might pique your interest, whether it's networking events, whether it's art, whether it's wellness, whether it's on artificial intelligence, which is a hot topic right now that needs more education, because I just feel like there's a lot of news articles promoting fear around it to replace jobs, where all the AI experts I speak to today, it's more about, well, how do we take the 20-30% of time and mundane tasks away from everyone's workload so they can focus on other stuff, which is very exciting for companies who think ahead and figure that out, because without the company saying, okay, now that you've got an extra 30% of time, this is what I want you to focus on, that's where it could get a bit unstuck, because they're like, oh, we don't know what to tell you what to do, or we don't know where we want you to focus your efforts, so maybe your job security is a bit iffy right now. So I think it's on companies, not to go on a tangent, to figure out, okay, well, if AI can take that time away, what are you going to get your workforce focusing on, or different teams that are more affected by AI? Yeah, so the experience stuff is really important to us, to the point where something I'm very proud of that I'm just going to talk about because I'm feeling super nostalgic, and it kind of comes into the networking point, which I'll make shortly, which I did a lot of, but just funnily enough, my wife, I say, oh yeah, I feel like I'm an introvert now, and she always laughs at my face because, like, why would I even be doing this video right now if I'm an introvert? But I think it's different, right? Speaking to you through the safety of a camera right now, even though I do want to impart some wisdom and stuff, very different to being in front of like 100 people or something like that, in a event space. I can turn it on and off, but anyway. We hosted an event which we were very proud of, and we were first to do it in the world, but it's been forgotten, and I hope someone does it again soon. I'm sure you've all heard the elevator pitch, especially within the startup community, right? I'll give you an elevator pitch. If Richard Branson from Virgin was in an elevator with you for 60 seconds before he gets to his floor, pitch him your idea, right? We took that concept and we partnered with an amusement park called Luna Park in Sydney, and we coined Ferris wheel pitching, right? So we put startup founders with investors, and we had one of the investors from the Shark Tank show back then, and we put them in the Ferris wheel carriage, and the idea is you get one spin to pitch your idea, and if they like it, you might get funding. So we kind of had a lot of fun from a brand perspective that way. Like the TwoSpace brand was, we don't take ourselves too seriously. We do cool and fun shit. We're in a bunch of locations like beaches and all that kind of stuff. So that was great for our brand because it was different, right? And people wanted to be in non-office environments, even if they wanted to get work done or meet other people, which worked for us really well in terms of getting attention and all that kind of stuff. So that's an interesting thing for us back then. When we thought about our brand, we weren't necessarily about colors or logos or anything like that, or how should we sponsor these big conferences and spend money there. It was more about how do we make people feel something when they think about our brand. And the way we did it was by hosting stuff like the Ferris wheel pitching event. We hosted, funnily enough, lots of events and speaker and networking nights like this kind of talk I'm having with you now, about founders talking about how they failed, because we wanted to humanize the whole process. We wanted people to realize that, hey, you might see a lot of cool stories out there being pushed to you, especially on socials, about people winning, but there's a lot of people who have failed. And failed is it's interesting, right? Because it's depending on how you define failure, because even though technically our company failed because it's no longer around, right? Even though we kind of exited that to another company, I don't see it as a failure, because I took all of these lessons, which I guess I'll speak to shortly, and took them to what I'm doing now. And it's allowed me to really grow as an individual and open a lot of doors and meet a lot of people, right? But the networking point I guess I was going to make is really interesting. Like, I find back then, and also back then for me as well, networking was very interesting in the sense that I would think, oh, I'm just going to run into this room and see if I can get 100 business cards. Right? I'm just going to run around and speak to all these people. And I used to have competitions with some of my staff saying, let's see who can get the most business cards, which was really wanky back then, right? And not the right thing to do, because you may get 100 cards and you may add them all on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But if you're spending all that time meeting 100 people, you haven't left an impression on any of them, right? So I think if I could do that again, I would rather almost try and spend some quality time with people that I genuinely would be interested in talking to, not because I necessarily targeted them, right? Because I wanted something from them, because that comes through as inauthentic as well. Everyone can smell it from a mile away. Like, I'll tell you a story. The one that like is funny, but I'm not proud of. I was so hell bent on networking back then that there were two scenarios that, it just makes me go thinking about it a bit. But don't regret it, because it was a learning. And also I met some people that I cherish as friends today by sneaking into some of these conferences. There were VIP lunches and events at a lot of these startup and tech conferences, like TechCrunch and all that kind of stuff, when they were in Australia. And I used to like sneak into the VIP speaker section by through the illusion of confidence, going up and holding up my guest pass, but having my three fingers like covering whether it's a normal color one or a VIP, and just being, oh, I'm speaking later this afternoon, I just need to go in and get some lunch. And they'd be like, yeah, so go in. And then I get to network with all the other speakers because they think I was a speaker, and they give some form of, oh, you're important, I will give you some time, right? And also what I used to do was, if I couldn't get into areas, but there were there were people I really wanted to meet, and this is the hustler's mentality that works for a lot, but I don't live by that anymore. I think I've outgrown's the wrong word, because I don't think it's beneath me. I just don't have the energy for it anymore. I used to just hang out near the bathrooms, no joke, drinking bottles of water. So when someone important eventually had to take a leak, I could stand at a urinal nearby them, take a leak next to them, and have a quick chat. Do my urinal pitch, not the elevator or the Ferris wheel pitch, literally the urinal pitch. Yeah, because you never feel more exposed as a man than when your slacks are down and you're taking a whiz, right? So if you can have a chat with them, then sometimes it works, right? But towards the end again of that networking and startup pitch, and even to what I do today, if I'm somewhere, I always kind of frankly look to the quietest person in the room, right? And I just have a chat with them. Or if there's someone that I'm genuinely interested in having a chat with, I will. Because if your goal is not to go into those scenarios to come out with value, but just to have an experience, listen to some talks, take some information in. If you have a genuine interest to talk to someone, do it. Just take care of yourself, right? You'd be surprised. There's been so many times where I've taken that approach, spoken to the quietest person in the room, turns out to be the guy that owns the whole bloody thing, right? And then we connect via that way, and have an authentic conversation, because I didn't know you owned the thing, he didn't know I knew, or anything like that. And then we just kind of bonded over just a conversation about whatever we wanted at the time, right? So networking, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that's probably something to really think about when you're doing that now. Well, what else could I talk about? I'm sure there's something. Oh, I guess, to end it almost, because I think I've been talking for a bit of time now. And since I'm not planning on editing this or anything, and if you've made it this far, thank you for your attention, is what have I taken from all of that and applied to my job today, right? Because I work for a big corporate Fortune 500 company. It's got 100,000 employees, earns 2 billion revenue, I believe, a year. Is, I guess, the grit, the not giving up, the discipline, dealing with 100 different moving parts, not folding under pressure. Sometimes when you do this, when you do embark on this journey, the thing that you take out more than anything, I would almost pull it down to 3 things, right? One is courage, because you took the leap. I think courage, my definition of courage is the willingness to try. So good on you for taking the leap, whether it succeeds or fails or whatever. That is a value that I think is becoming lost. People are too afraid to fail or take the leap, but you learn more about yourself doing that than any technical skill, right? Because at the end of the day, if you know yourself, I think you can outperform anyone, right? The second is discipline, right? You really figure out how to just do things you don't want to do and how to hang in there. So it's kind of like discipline and grit, right? And the third, I suppose, is the moving parts comment. You just figure out how to deal with all of these problems and all of these things at once. And you may not need to apply that in a new role when you go work somewhere else within a corporate environment, but taking that skill and learning over there, I think, is extremely, extremely valuable. So an application of those 3 things wherever you go next, I mean, even say that in a bloody job interview or something like that if you're going. I started this thing. I actually think a lot of companies really value failure. Not enough people fail. What was Thomas Edison's saying? It's like, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways that it didn't work, right? I'm not saying go start 10,000 companies. It's more, you learn a lot and you figure out just how to take the leap, how to do stuff, how to figure it out. And it also doesn't undermine you if you're not someone who started a company or doesn't want to. That definition of entrepreneurship, doesn't have to be applied to starting a business or a side hustle. You could be entrepreneurial within your own company right now, within your team. You could behave that way within a larger machine, right? It doesn't have to be, oh, I went on Shark Tank and raised this money and I started this company. You can take that mindset and apply it right now. You could be entrepreneurial about a project, about a deal, about a growth strategy that you want to help spearhead or whatever it is. You could be entrepreneurial with your own time. It doesn't have to be a startup or a company. Like, just promise yourself you're going to see it out. Like, even this YouTube thing, I'm going to try this out for like a year, irrespective of whether anyone watches this or whatnot. But at least I'm going to commit to it and see where it goes. Just put yourself out there. And I think people value that. So I'm going to stop there. Sincerely, if you made it to the end, really appreciate your time and attention. And if you found this valuable at all, feel free to drop a comment in. And I can even send you stuff about the TwoSpace collateral and venue guides and app tests and all that kind of stuff if you're interested, especially if you're trying to start a business that's very similar today. So thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Oh, wait, I totally forgot. I've come back. That's why this part's edited in, to talk about what happened to the company. Maybe I subliminally didn't want to share that failure. And I just totally blanked. Even before I talk about that real quick, the valuation piece. Do I think we were worth $10 million? Absolutely not. It's just how it works, as many of you know within the startup industry, and because the way companies get valued, even today, which is why I also don't believe in funding and taking money and that obligation. Because if, let's say you raise $1 million, because that's 20% of your company or whatever, if you don't hit the very aggressive targets that investor places on you to hit that valuation, it hurts you a lot more than it helps you. It means it's going to be difficult to raise more money. And even if you do, it'll require a bigger piece of your company. And then before you know it, you own a minimum share of your company. You're not in control anymore. So, valuations, I think, is an art more than a science. I think it's a bunch of financial jujitsu, especially for companies that aren't actually making any profit, that are more about revenue or data or anything, even though they do deliver a lot of value. So the way that we hit 10 million, like, not to bog you down with calculations, was, long story short, it's just, what do we think the value of the company is going to be in 5 years' time? And it was kind of calculated by a bunch of interested investors who wanted to put money into TwoSpace. And we ended up saying no, because they just wanted a pretty big piece of it. In hindsight, would we still be around if we took that money? Probably not, because the time that we exited, luckily, I guess, was right before COVID hit. And because our model is restaurant-based and hotel-based, all of those venues shut down, right? And that was our physical meeting point for our model. Granted, because we pivoted very heavily into tech and had the online platform, I do think if we had the stomach for it, it could have survived, because we would have just had everyone working from home connected on our platform. So they could still chat. They could still, co-work to a degree digitally. They would just be working from home. They could log into the platform, right? And because we already spent a lot of time building that community, it could have worked, because the space is the vehicle for human interaction. But because we had like many years of the space to build that community and to foster some sort of value there, it could have carried over into people working from home enough to survive, coming back when things opened up and redeploying, I guess, into a bunch of venues. So the tech was important. So right before COVID, the reason why we exited out of it, if I'm going to be completely transparent, and which is why it's a marathon, not a sprint, frankly, I think we just burnt out. We were done. After 6 years. It was just, even though we built something incredible, it made more sense to hand the reins to a team and a company that had the, I guess, the eagerness and the energy to kick on, right? So we agreed on a value and we took, I guess, equity and a stake within that business. And there's nothing glamorous about it, right? it's and I think, you know, burnout is really important. I think people underestimate how tough it is to go on this journey, even though there's a bunch of learnings that we've discussed that I've taken and deployed into my new role, which I think has actually benefited me a lot. I mean, for example, over the 6-year period, we didn't take salaries, as in the co-founders. We paid our staff and everything like that, but we didn't take salaries. We invested everything back into the business. Could you imagine? Like, even just think about that. Do you believe in something so much, right, that you were willing not to pay yourself anything? And that doesn't mean it's a young man's game or a young woman's game, because they want to take that risk. Because Harvard Business Review actually did a study recently which showed that the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones that start something in their 40s. Which makes a lot of sense to me, because as a young founder or younger founder, because I'm 36 now, I was just like a dog chasing a car, right? I was chasing the hype all the time, which actually helped us very early on, but wasn't a sustainable, good strategy towards the end. I was too bogged down into the next news interview, the next press release, the next branding exercise. I could have spent a lot more time in hindsight on the operational implications and scalability of how we go from, you know, 10 to 50 locations, how we would have done that better, and 50 to 100 and then to 500, how we would have scaled that more effectively. And that's kind of where our journey with that stuff went. But every time I think about it, I still get very excited. I was a very passionate person back then, as I'm sure many of you are, endeavoring in your companies or a similar one. What I would say in hindsight, though, is passion is great and it gets you started, but it's a bit tricky, because the word passion, even in itself, it's great when it's great, but when it sucks, it sucks. So if you can figure a way how to hone your mind and your discipline to replace passion with, I guess, drive, right? So it's not emotionally based, but it is based off your discipline and your, I guess, your need to achieve and progress and move forward. I think that would serve you a lot better. It's definitely what I do today. So, final sign off. I hope you found that valuable. And yeah, if you found stuff like this interesting, let me know. I'll talk more about it. There's a bunch of stuff I missed, and see if I can help out. So thank you for your time and attention again. Sorry for that last edit.